today's lesson, we're going to be looking at the history of North America. That's your first major topic. And then later on in the lesson, we're going to get into the second major topic, which is the government systems of North America. Which again, in North America, we're looking at the United States and Canada. Your essential question for this lesson is, what makes North America a region? Like, why do we look at North America as a whole, United States and Canada? Why do we look at those two as a regional look of the world? Okay, and that's what we're going to look at, and that's what we're going to answer today. First thing that we're going to look at is the Native Americans. Now, the Native Americans obviously were here before any Europeans were here, okay? And it drives me bananas when people say that Christopher Columbus discovered America, because we know that, number one, he never landed on mainland America, and number two, you can't discover something when there's people that are already there. So, very important that you understand that the United States wasn't discovered by Europeans. For Europe it was, but it was already there. People were already here. Okay, these Native Americans came here thousands of years ago from the Beringia land strait. The water levels were low because of water that was in glaciers. Glaciers were higher, and so the water levels were lower, and they walked across from Asia, these nomadic peoples, into North America, into Alaska, Canada, down into the United States. Misconception is we are not going to call them the Indians, because that's just because of Columbus's mistake that they're referred to as the Indians. They are the Native Americans. This is not India, so the people are not Indians. They're the Native Americans. So let's get rid of that misconception at first. Now, there's a bunch of different cultures of Native Americans. Just because you're a Native American does not mean that you all have one particular culture. One of the people groups of the Native Americans are living in the tundra area. These are the descendants of the Eskimos. Living in these icy conditions, and they're having to kill animals for fur, and then living in types of igloo areas. Another area that we're talking about is the Pacific Coast Native Americans. And the Pacific Coast Native Americans, let me look at my notes here. The Pacific Coast Native Americans lived in a milder climate, and so their resources revolved around a milder climate and the animals that were around. You've also got the Indians that lived in the southwestern area of the United States, where it was kind of deserty, and so they had to develop different types of irrigation to live in the area. We also had Native Americans, I almost said it. We also had Native Americans that lived in the Great Plains. These are the Native Americans that we probably think about, Texas and Oklahoma. These are the ones that follow the buffalo herds around. We also had Native Americans in the Mississippi area that lived off of the land. They were nomadic, they hunted, they raised crops, as well as trading seashells and things based off of what they found in the Mississippi River, as well as the coastal area. And we also had Native Americans in the northeastern area, in the woodland areas. These Native Americans were more community-type Native Americans that grouped together and lived together. They hunted deer, turkey, squirrels, a bunch of different things that they could come into contact with. Moving right along into history with the European colonies. Now, it's important for you to understand that the European countries came over here for one reason: for land. Some of them, like the Spanish, say they came over here to spread Christianity. And some of the Spanish did that, in fact, but over here for land, okay? For money. Sometimes you hear gold, God, and glory. That was the reason they came, but land and then gold is kind of the reason that they came. We also had the French. The Spanish, before I get off of them, the Spanish settled in areas around Florida and then west of the Mississippi River. The French came in, and the French especially settled in the eastern part of Canada. That's where you're going to see a lot of them located. And the French came to trade. They didn't come for land, really. They came to trade with the Native Americans that were here, and that's why a lot of the Native Americans allied with the French during the French and Indian War, because they treated them better. They treated them like friends and allies. And then later on, in the early 1700s, you had the British come over and set up colonies, which we'll get to in our history lesson in just a second. Next major section of history that we're going to look at is the two new countries, as we're calling them. And these two countries, of course, are Canada and the United States. And I've got dates here. And it's important that you understand the expansion of these dates, but these are key dates. The first is Canada's key date. In 1763, the British officially kicked the French out of Canada, and they take over Canada as its colony. Okay, they set up colonies in the eastern portions of Canada and then moving a little bit west. 1760s, this is when Great Britain comes in and says, we need all these taxes, we need all this money, that we helped you in the French and Indian War, now you need to pay us back a little bit. And this is when the United States kind of starts getting upset and they say, no taxation without representation. That's when this starts to happen, which leads to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which was in 1776, which eventually leads to the end of the American Revolution and in the beginning of the United States officially in 1783. Now, the next major subsection here is from sea to shining sea. We're already in the eastern areas of Canada and the United States, so now we got to move west. That's what this time period is talking about. It's that travel west. One thing that happens in 1763, I'm off on my dates, the Louisiana Purchase comes into place. The United States purchases Louisiana from France, and then they are able to double the size of the United States during this expansion. We also have the adoption of Texas, which makes us move a little bit further west. And then you have the California Gold Rush, which influences people to move even further west to the west coast of the United States. Now, one key concept to keep in mind here is what happened to Native Americans. Okay, they were already here living successfully, and then we come in, and because they can't compete with our economy, we kick them out. Okay, and it's kind of a sad time in the United States history that we just kick them out. In Canada, you don't have this kicking out going on. They kind of blend, and we have a cultural blend. But in the United States, that's not the case. We see them as foreigners, we kick them out. The next subsection of history that we're looking at is what I've called growth, division, and unity. Because of the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s, we start to see factories develop in the United States and in southern Canada, and you start to see industrialization going on, and you start to see the economy actually growing. Part of industrialization that I want to point out is hydroelectric power and the use of waterfalls to produce power for these factories was huge. And then, as people wanted to move away from these waterways and closer to the natural resource maybe, they started developing steam engines and using these steam engines to power the factories. And we'll come back to industrialization in a little bit. Then you have the American Civil War that goes on and the Underground Railroad that develops in the United States because of slavery. And this American Civil War, of course, is when the South and the North turn against each other and fight. United States, well, I say United States, the North wins this war, and the United States is brought back together. This stupid fly's driving me crazy. All right, moving right along to F, technological and social change. During the late 1800s, settlement in the Great Plains is encouraged because people aren't living there. People are afraid of the Indians. The United States is pushing people that way and saying, hey, we can give you really, really cheap land if you'll move west, and this land is great. So they start pushing people to the west, and they start pushing Native Americans out of this area. And they're suggesting that people farm. And with technology starting to come into play, you start to have tractors, and you start to have steel plows, and you start to have successful farming going on because of technology. And we start moving from subsistence farming to commercial farming after we start moving west during this major migration era of United States history. Then we move to the industrialization era and the Industrial Revolution. Again, we kind of touched on it, but during this time period, the United States and Canada start seeing a lot of success. Because of the assembly line, this idea that people can work on this assembly line and do the same job all day, every day, and we have this big, long line, and we can produce a whole lot more because of this. That idea develops during the Industrial Revolution. And then we've also got the idea of mass production, of producing a lot of stuff. And because of our economic system of free enterprise, this can happen because we need a supply to meet the demand so that we can make money. Okay, and because of our free enterprise system of economy, which will come in the next unit, mass production is an idea that starts to be pushed during this time period, and it starts to be something that you see. The next major subsection in history that we're going to be looking at is World War I and World War II. Now, to kind of clear up some things, the United States and Canada were allies, and Canada actually is a lot of help, especially during World War II, during the war by providing troops and providing supplies because of the industrialization that's already gone on. So we were allies. And you can see economic prosperity from both of these wars by the population pyramids of both of these countries because you have a baby boom era of both places because there's economic prosperity. Now, of course, after World War I, there's not a big baby boom because right after World War I, we dropped straight into a Great Depression, which definitely is not economic prosperity. But then after World War II, both of these countries, you see a boom in the population because the economies are doing really well and people are really happy about life. And that's very similar in both the United States and Canada's population pyramid. Last major subsection of history that we're going to look at is immigration. And immigration starts to change. Before kind of the late 1900s and early 2000s, before this time period, most of the immigration was coming from Europe. Now, during this time period, after World War II, you start to see immigration coming from Latin America and coming from Asia. The reason we now have an influx of immigration from Latin America and Asia are these new jobs that are opening up. Latin America and Asia at this time period, late 1900s, early 2000s, are just becoming industrialized, and so the jobs that they have available are primary and secondary economic type jobs. The United States and Canada have tertiary and quaternary type jobs available, and so people wanting to excel and to promote, they are then seeking these types of jobs from the United States. Now, your last major topic for today are the government systems. I've got a United States government systems and a Canada government systems, A and B, that we're going to be talking about. Now, as soon as the United States kicks Great Britain out of the United States and we break away from that monarchy, we create a republic of our own, which means that we elect representatives that represent us. That's the idea of the republic that was set up from the United States. And this, you see the republic on the state and the national levels. You see more of a democracy on the local levels of the United States. And Canada really still revolves around a republic, not so much a democracy. But there are concepts of that. After the fall of Great Britain, we create the Constitution of 1787. The idea of this Constitution is to create a strong national government that still gives rights back to states, as well as still gives rights back to the individuals to protect the people, because people were afraid of a strong national government because that's what we had with Great Britain. So we create the Constitution of 1787. Any changes that go on with the Constitution of the United States are amendments. These amendments are put into place that make changes. The first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. These protect right, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, those types of things. That goes into the Bill of Rights. And then in the United States, we have a three-branch government. The judicial, executive, and legislative branches all go into play because of our Republican type of system. And that's how our government system is run in the United States. And next, we have the government system of Canada. Now, Canada's is kind of different and unique from the United States. It's very similar in ways, but it's also different in ways. They have what's called a dominion. They created this dominion, which is partially a self-governing country that has close ties to Great Britain, and we kind of start to see that diminish, but we still have those close ties. Okay? In 1931, this is the first time that Canada officially declares independence from Great Britain. But Great Britain says, hey, you're independent now, but we still need to approve any changes that you make to your government. It wasn't until 1982 that Canada officially kicks Great Britain out and doesn't have that close tie. And Great Britain doesn't have that chance to change the government system anymore. That's not that long ago. So they're kind of a young nation in regards to a country. Now, their main leader is a prime minister, and the prime minister is in charge of the parliament. Parliament is this legislative body that's elected that makes decisions for the people. And again, the prime minister is the leader of that in Canada. You also have a governor general in Canada. The governor general is the person that's appointed by the British monarch. So the Queen appointed him to kind of represent her in Canada. But again, he's really not the leader of the government. It's the prime minister that's the leader of the government. He's essentially the head of the government. And you also have a cabinet in Canada that kind of helps the prime minister and the governor general to make the decisions. Main thing you need to know is the prime minister's the main guy in charge. He's in charge of the parliament, the elected body. And they still have some close ties to Great Britain, making them a dominion. Now, the last thing that I want to look at is cultural convergence. Cultural convergence is the idea that cultures are going to converge. The aspect of cultural convergence that we see in today's notes is about democracy and European ideas on government. Both the United States and Canada share democratic ideals which they got from Europe. This also makes them a single geographic region, tying it back to the essential question, but there's a lot of other reasons why it's a region. This is just one of those. And again, get democracy from Europe.